November 20th, 1966. The Lunar Orbiter. Two spacecraft was gliding silently through the void, 46 kilometers above the gray, airless surface of the Moon. Its camera, a remarkable piece of Cold War engineering, was systematically photographing the Sea of Tranquility. NASA needed maps, detailed, precise, scientifically reliable maps. The agency was preparing to send human beings to this place, and it wanted to know every ridge, every crater, every rock that might threaten a safe landing. The photographs were meant to be routine, thousands of frames, each cataloged, filed, cross-referenced. Science at its most methodical. But when one particular image was developed, printed, and placed on the examination table, several scientists reportedly went quiet. Not the polite, professional quiet of people waiting their turn to speak. The other kind of quiet. The kind that happens when something unexpected appears in a place where nothing unexpected should be. On the flat, gray plain, a landscape that should have held nothing but craters and geological silence, there were 6 long, narrow shadows. Not the round shadows you get from craters. Not the wide, diffuse shadows cast by hills or ridges. These were thin, precise, vertical. They stretched across the lunar surface like the shadows of needles driven into a cushion, like the shadows of obelisks, like the shadows of towers built by something that knew geometry. The longest shadow extended 110 meters. Calculate the object height from the sun angle. The sun was just 11 degrees above the horizon that day, and you get something roughly 20 meters tall, a 6-story building, on the Moon, on a world where there is no wind, no water, no tectonic activity, no erosion, no chemistry, no geological process that could conceivably produce a vertical structure. The Washington Post ran the headline, "6 Mysterious Shadows on the Moon." And from that moment, something was set in motion that has never fully stopped. It has now been almost 60 years, and in those 6 decades, the Moon has been covered in imaginary architecture. Towers 1.5 kilometers tall, pyramids that allegedly mirror the layout of Giza, glass domes stretching across craters, bridges spanning lunar valleys, roads running arrow straight for dozens of kilometers across the regolith, the ruins of cities, parking lots for spacecraft. On one Apollo photograph, conspiracy theorists claimed to see an entire skyscraper, 2.5 kilometers high, hovering above the surface. On another, a fragment of a glass structure with a visible shadow beneath it. On a third, a bridge connecting the 2 walls of a crater like some ancient overpass. Every year, the internet delivers a fresh wave of sensations. NASA is hiding the truth. There are alien bases on the Moon. The Apollo astronauts were warned never to return. Millions of people believe this. Billions of YouTube views, dozens of books, hundreds of films, thousands of websites. An entire industry, from documentary films to coffee mugs reading "The Truth About the Moon," has grown up around the conviction that NASA is photographing the ruins of an alien civilization and suppressing the evidence. Here is the amusing irony at the heart of all of this. NASA is the one posting all these photographs. Every image captured by every lunar probe is sitting on NASA's servers, freely accessible to anyone on Earth with an internet connection. If the agency wanted to hide something, why would it publish the very photographs on which conspiracy theorists find their towers? But we'll return to that question. First, let's look at the structures themselves. Today we are going to examine the most famous alleged constructions on the Moon, from those 6 original shadows to the glass towers of Richard Hoagland. We will look at the original photographs. We will look at new images of the same locations, captured by modern cameras with resolution 100 times better than what existed in 1966. And we will try to understand why the human brain so desperately wants to see cities in places where there is nothing but rock and dust. Prepare yourself. The truth turns out to be no less interesting than any conspiracy theory. The Blair Cuspids, where it all began. Let's begin with those 6 shadows, which acquired the name Blair Cuspids after the scientist who first brought them to public attention. William Blair worked in the biotechnology division of Boeing, the same Boeing that had built the Lunar Orbiter probes. He was an experienced analyst of aerial photography, a man who had spent years studying reconnaissance images from the American Southwest in search of archaeological sites. He had a trained eye for pattern, for geometry, for the subtle signs of human or inhuman intention embedded in landscape. When Blair examined the Lunar Orbiter to photograph, he did what he always did. He got out his compass and protractor. He measured distances. He calculated angles. And what he found, or what he believed he found, was that the 6 objects were not randomly distributed. They formed a system of rectangular coordinates, 6 isosceles triangles, 2 axes of 3 points each. And nearby, Blair detected what appeared to be a rectangular depression in the surface, something that resembled, to his archaeologist's eye, a weathered foundation. Blair was careful. He did not claim these were alien constructions. He said something more restrained, more professionally precise. If such a complex were found on Earth, the first thing an archaeologist would do is send an expedition. He was describing what the evidence suggested, not what he knew. His Boeing colleague Richard Shorthill, a specialist in lunar surface features, offered the deflating counter-argument. Simpler explanation, Shorthill said. Take any random set of objects, and sooner or later you'll find a group that forms some kind of pattern. This was 1967. The debate was never resolved. Not then. It waited, frozen in the amber of a grainy photograph, until the technology existed to settle it properly. The technology arrived in 2009 when NASA launched the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, carrying a camera capable of resolving features just 50 centimeters across. 100 times sharper than the Lunar Orbiter, 2 camera that had started all of this. The LRO photographed the Blair Cuspid site multiple times, from multiple angles, in crisp digital clarity. And the towers? Gone. Not hidden. Not removed. Never there. What LRO revealed was a scatter of ordinary lunar boulders, the kind of large rocks that accumulate around the eroded lips of old impact craters. Some of them are substantial, 10 to 15 meters across. But when the sun is just 11 degrees above the horizon, as it was when the original 1966 photograph was taken, even a modest-sized rock projects a shadow dozens of times its own height across the flat terrain. Think about what happens to your own shadow at sunset. You become a giant. Your proportions distort. Your silhouette stretches impossibly long across the ground. You are the same person you were at noon, but the geometry of low-angle light has transformed you into something that looks monumental. The same optical physics applied to those lunar boulders. Rocks perhaps 1.5 meters in height cast shadows that looked, at that sun angle, like 20-meter spires. And the geometric pattern? Shorthill was right all along. This is not mysterious. It is mathematics. If you take any 7 randomly distributed objects on a flat plane and draw lines between them, you will find isosceles triangles. You will find right angles. You will find axes. Human visual cognition is extraordinarily good at detecting geometric regularity, even when the regularity is an artifact of selection. Blair chose 7 objects from the photograph, but there were dozens of other boulders in the same image, each casting its own shadow. He included the 7 that made an interesting pattern. He excluded the rest. This is called cherry picking, or more formally, confirmation bias. You have a hypothesis. These objects are arranged deliberately, and you select the data that supports it while discarding the data that does not. It is one of the oldest and most deeply embedded errors in human reasoning. Blair was not a fool. He was a careful analyst with real expertise. But the desire to find pattern is so powerful and so unconscious that it can corrupt even skilled observation. There is one more detail worth dwelling on. Blair's entire geometric analysis rested on selecting specific points on each boulder as reference coordinates. But a boulder is not a mathematical point. It is an irregular object several meters across. Shift your reference point by a single meter in any direction, and your isosceles triangle becomes an ordinary scaling one. The entire architectural geometry of the Blair cuspids was built on an arbitrary choice of which pixel to call the center of each rock on a blurry, low-resolution photograph. This is not measurement. It is drawing pictures in clouds. The Shard, a 1.5-kilometer tower that was a scratch. But the Blair cuspids are, as the saying goes, merely the opening act. The real show began when Richard Hoagland arrived. Hoagland was a former science consultant to CBS News, a man of genuine intelligence and remarkable rhetorical gifts. In the 1980s, he had become famous, notorious, depending on your perspective, for his work on the Face on Mars, a formation in the Cydonia region of the Martian surface that, in a grainy 1976 Viking orbiter photograph, appeared to resemble a human face. Hoagland built an elaborate theory around it. The face was artificial. It was part of an ancient Martian city. The evidence was being suppressed by NASA. When the Mars Global Surveyor photographed Cydonia in 1998 with vastly superior cameras, the face was revealed as a mesa, an eroded hill, unremarkable in every way except for the way one particular combination of lighting and low resolution had given it a vaguely facial appearance. The mystery evaporated. The face was a rock. Hoagland did not evaporate with it. He pivoted to the moon, where there was an abundance of old, low-resolution imagery and no shortage of willing audiences. His method was, in retrospect, almost elegantly simple. Find a photograph of sufficiently poor quality, enlarge it past the point of useful information, apply contrast enhancement filters, and in the resulting pixelated chaos, find structures. The worse the original image quality, the better. A sharp photograph shows you what is actually there. A blurry one shows you what you want to see. Among his most famous discoveries was the object he called the Shard. It appeared on a photograph taken by Lunar Orbiter 3 in 1967, an image that showed, or seemed to show, a vertical feature extending from the lunar surface. Hoagland measured it. He announced it was approximately 1.5 kilometers tall. 1.5 kilometers. That is taller than the Burj Khalifa, taller than any structure ever built on Earth, standing on a world with no atmosphere to protect it from micrometeorite impacts, no manufacturing base, no engineering tradition, no civilization. A 1.5-kilometer tower on the moon would, by the way, be clearly visible from Earth through a modest amateur telescope. It would appear in the observations of every amateur astronomer who had ever pointed a lens at the moon. It would be in every lunar atlas ever printed. Hoagland's explanation for why no one had noticed this before was that NASA had been carefully managing which images it released and in what quality. The Shard proved the existence of what he called glass architecture, immense constructions built by an ancient lunar civilization from a material with the optical properties of glass, transparent and reflective at once, which explained why it appeared as a ghostly shimmer rather than a solid form. What do image processing specialists see when they look at the same photograph? A film artifact, a defect in the photographic medium itself. This requires a brief technical digression, because understanding how the lunar orbiter cameras worked is the key to understanding the vast majority of alleged lunar anomalies. The Lunar Orbiter spacecraft did not transmit digital photographs. There were no digital cameras in 1966. Instead, the probes carried real photographic film. standard silver halide emulsion, the same basic technology used in every 35mm camera of the era. The film was exposed inside the spacecraft as it orbited the moon. Then, and this is where it gets complicated, the film was developed in a miniaturized chemical processing system aboard the spacecraft itself. The developed film was dried, then scanned line by line using an electronic beam. The resulting signal was then transmitted by radio to Earth, where it was reconverted into an image. Count the stages at which artifacts could be introduced: exposure, chemical development, drying, electronic scanning, radio transmission, reception, image reconstruction. Each step was an opportunity for scratches, streaks, chemical artifacts, transmission errors, noise, data loss. The shard is a streak artifact, a linear defect in the film or the scanning process that happened, by chance, to align with the edge of a crater in a way that suggested verticality. When the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter imaged the same location with digital precision, the surface was flat, ordinary, and completely structure-free. The tower existed only in the wound of the film. The castle, glass architecture, and grand conspiracy. The castle was Hoagland's most audacious claim. From a photograph taken during one of the Apollo missions, he extracted, through aggressive enlargement and enhancement, what he described as a vast glass construction hovering approximately 2.5 kilometers above the lunar surface. Transparent, semi-transparent, composed of modular sections, like a skyscraper assembled from cubic building blocks. He called his broader theory glass architecture and gave it full literary treatment in his book Dark Mission, in which he argued that the entire moon had once been encased in such structures, a civilization-scale engineering project, and that what we now observe are the ruins, shattered by billions of years of micrometeorite bombardment, the broken remnants of a world that was once a functioning inhabited base. The book became a bestseller. Hoagland toured major conferences. He appeared on television. He testified before live audiences that numbered in the thousands. He created, in effect, a movement, the lunar anomalists, dedicated to finding the fingerprints of the builders in every suggestive shadow and every ambiguous blur. What do the imaging specialists say? They say, JPEG compression artifact, generational copying artifact. The Apollo mission photographs were physical prints. They were copied, and the copies were copied, and those copies were scanned, and the scans were rescanned. Every generation of reproduction introduced new noise into the image. Every compression introduced new block-structured artifacts, the hallmark of lossy digital encoding. What Hoagland interpreted as glass blocks were the rectangular tessellations produced by JPEG compression applied to a degraded analog original. There was no structure. There was image deterioration, presented with confidence as ancient architecture. When researchers accessed the original high-resolution scans made directly from the Apollo film negatives, bypassing all the generations of copying, the castle location showed lunar sky and stars, nothing else. Hoagland's response to this was philosophically interesting, if intellectually dishonest. NASA had digitally removed the structures from the newer scans. The absence of evidence had been transformed into further evidence of conspiracy. This is the rhetorical trick that makes certain kinds of belief systems impregnable. Confirming evidence confirms the theory. Disconfirming evidence confirms the conspiracy that is hiding the truth. No observation is possible that could challenge the belief. This is not science. This is not even pseudoscience. It is theology. The psychology of seeing what isn't there. Why do people believe in lunar structures so readily, so eagerly, so passionately? The answer is not stupidity. The answer is humanity. The first mechanism is pareidolia. Our brains are pattern recognition engines, evolved over millions of years to detect meaningful structure in the environment, especially the structure of faces, bodies, and intentions. We see faces in clouds, in wood grain, in the craters of Mars. We hear voices in white noise. We find meaningful sequences in random data. This is not a malfunction. It is a feature. The cost of failing to recognize a predator is death. The cost of seeing a predator that isn't there is embarrassment. Natural selection has calibrated us heavily toward false positives. We are built to over-detect pattern. On the lunar surface, pareidolia operates in an especially favorable environment. The landscape is simultaneously familiar and profoundly alien. There are rocks. We understand rocks. There are shadows. We understand shadows. But there is no context, no familiar scale, no reference objects to anchor our interpretation. No trees, no buildings, no human figures. When we look at a lunar photograph, our brains are confronted with forms that trigger visual pattern systems without providing the contextual information that would normally allow those systems to self-correct. The shadow that looks like a tower cannot be walked up to and confirmed as a boulder. We are permanently at a distance, permanently reliant on ambiguous optical information. And into that ambiguity, the pattern recognition engine pours meaning. The moon has its own ancient pareidolia. Every human culture for thousands of years has seen a face in the dark patches of the lunar disk. The mare, the vast ancient lava plains whose irregular outlines combine, from Earth, into something that looks like eyes and a mouth. Astronomers call it the man in the moon. It is visible to every naked eye on every clear night. Nobody claims aliens carved it, but we are ready to believe in artificial towers on the basis of a pixel. The second mechanism is image quality, or rather, image degradation. The lunar orbiter photographs and early Apollo imagery were captured at resolutions measured in tens of meters per pixel. At that scale, an ordinary boulder becomes indistinguishable from a pyramid. A cluster of rocks becomes indistinguishable from city ruins. When modern cameras, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter's resolution reaches 50 centimeters per pixel, photograph the same locations. The pyramids become rubble heaps, and the ruins become crater fields. But the conspiracy literature consistently prefers the old, blurry images. The reason is precisely their ambiguity. You cannot see an alien tower in a sharp photograph. You can see anything in a degraded one. The third mechanism is the most powerful and the most human. People want to believe. The idea that the moon harbors the remnants of an alien civilization is one of the most emotionally compelling ideas available to the modern imagination. It means we are not alone in a cold and indifferent universe. It means someone was here before us. It means the cosmos is populated with intelligence, with intention, with civilizations that built things that endured. It means that on any clear night, you can look up at the moon, that small, familiar, intimate object that has been the constant companion of every human who ever lived, and know that you are looking at evidence of something greater than yourself. That is a beautiful thought. It is an enormously comforting thought. It is a thought that the actual moon cannot provide, because the actual moon is a dead world. It has been dead for billions of years. It has never been alive. In the 4.5 billion years of its existence, nothing has happened there that was more interesting than the occasional meteorite impact. Its surface temperature swings from plus 127 degrees Celsius in sunlight to minus 173 degrees Celsius in shadow. There is no air. There is no water. There is no magnetic field. There is no biology. The regolith, the ground surface, is a fine glass-sharp dust that clings to everything and slowly destroys anything it contacts. This is not a romantic place. The truth is dull. The fantasy is magnificent. And when offered a choice between a dull truth and a magnificent fantasy, most people do not choose the truth, unless they are scientists, for whom the dull truth is, perversely, the most interesting thing in the world. The international conspiracy that would have to exist. Now let us think through the conspiracy itself, not emotionally, but logically. If there were artificial structures on the moon, it would not only be NASA that photographed them. The moon has been observed and photographed by the space agencies of the Soviet Union, China, Japan, India, the European Space Agency, Israel, and South Korea. Dozens of missions, hundreds of thousands of photographs taken by cameras of different designs, different resolutions, different wavelengths, operated by organizations with radically different political interests. The Soviet Union ran a parallel lunar program throughout the 1960s and 1970s. The Soviets were not NASA's friends. They were NASA's rivals, adversaries, enemies in the most consequential geopolitical competition in history. If NASA had discovered alien structures and was concealing them, the Soviet Union would have had every motivation, ideological, propagandistic, strategic, to expose the fraud. The Soviets photographed the moon from orbit. They landed robotic rovers on its surface. They sent the Luna and Zond probes on trajectories that gave them extensive photographic coverage. They found nothing, and they said nothing, because there was nothing to find and nothing to say. China's Chang'e 4 mission, in January 2019, accomplished something no mission had ever done before. It successfully landed on the far side of the moon and transmitted thousands of high-resolution images from a surface that, in the conspiracy tradition, is the most likely location of alien bases, precisely because it cannot be seen from Earth. The images showed rocks, regolith, craters, and geological silence. No structures, no ruins, no architecture. India's Chandrayaan missions have mapped the lunar surface at high resolution, covering the polar regions with particular thoroughness. Japan's Kaguya spacecraft transmitted terabytes of high-definition video and imaging data. The European Smart 1 mission conducted X-ray and infrared spectroscopy of the surface. None of these missions, not one, have returned data that suggests the presence of artificial construction. For the conspiracy to function, every space agency on Earth, including those whose governments have been fierce geopolitical adversaries of the United States, would need to have agreed to suppress the same evidence. Every engineer, scientist, mission controller, and data analyst employed by those agencies, hundreds of thousands of people over 6 decades, would need to have maintained perfect silence. Not a single whistleblower, not a single deathbed confession, not a single leaked document, not a single misplaced file. In the real world, large-scale secrets are extraordinarily difficult to maintain. The Pentagon Papers were leaked. COINTELPRO was exposed. The NSA's mass surveillance programs were revealed by Edward Snowden. The CIA's MK-Ultra program was uncovered through Freedom of Information requests. Governments are terrible at keeping secrets when those secrets involve thousands of participants and decades of time. The lunar conspiracy would need to be the single most successful cover-up in the history of organized human activity, maintained by the most adversarial nations in modern history, sustained for 60 years, involving millions of people, with 0 leaks, or the moon has no alien structures. I know which of these explanations seems more probable to me. The choice is yours. What the moon actually hides. Real scientific mysteries. Here is the genuine irony. The conspiracy theorists, obsessed with imaginary towers, are ignoring real mysteries, genuine scientific puzzles about the moon that have not been fully resolved, that generate real peer-reviewed papers, that real scientists find genuinely strange. Consider the lunar swirls. Scattered across the lunar surface are bright, curving patterns, some of them stretching for dozens of kilometers, that look, from orbit, like enormous thumbprints or the marks of a vast invisible brush. They are striking. They are beautiful in their strangeness, and their origin is not fully understood. The leading hypothesis involves localized magnetic fields embedded in the lunar crust. The moon has no global magnetic field, no equivalent to Earth's magnetosphere. But in certain areas, the rock is magnetized far more strongly than the average. This creates small magnetic bubbles that deflect the charged particles of the solar wind, protecting the underlying surface from the darkening process called space weathering. The swirls are the patches of relatively unweathered soil sitting beneath these magnetic shields. But why do those magnetic anomalies exist where they do? The most compelling current theory links them to ancient impact events, specifically to the antipodal focusing of seismic energy from major impacts, which may have magnetized rock on the opposite side of the moon by compressing it rapidly in the presence of a temporary impact-generated magnetic field. This is extraordinary physics, and almost no one outside the scientific community is talking about it, because a magnetic anomaly does not look like a glass tower and cannot be circled in red on a screenshot. Or consider the transient lunar phenomena, the brief, localized flashes, glows, color changes, and misty patches that terrestrial observers have been recording for centuries. Astronomers have cataloged hundreds of such events. Some are almost certainly explained by outgassing from the lunar interior, radon and other products of radioactive decay seeping through fractures in the crust. Others may involve electrostatic discharges in the lunar dust, which becomes electrically charged through its interaction with the solar wind and photoelectric emission. Still others may be the brief incandescent flashes produced by micrometeorite impacts at high velocity. But not all of them have been satisfactorily explained. There are cases in the historical record, some going back to medieval observations, that remain genuinely unresolved. If the conspiracy community wanted a real mystery to investigate, this is where they should be looking. And then there is the question of the deep lunar magnetic anomalies themselves, the places where the crust is magnetized with an intensity that implies the past existence of a global lunar dynamo, a convecting, electrically conductive liquid core generating a planetary-scale magnetic field. The moon has no such field today, but the rock retains the memory of one. When did it exist? When did it stop? Why? These questions touch on the fundamental evolution of planetary bodies, on the question of what makes a world habitable, on the history of the early solar system. These are genuine mysteries. They are not invented. They are not based on blurry photographs or stretched pixels. They do not require a global conspiracy to explain. They are simply hard scientific problems that have not yet been fully solved. And they are more interesting, more intellectually rich, and more cosmically significant than any alien tower. The conspiracy community does not find them interesting because they cannot be shown in a YouTube thumbnail. The moon as time machine. There is something about the moon that should take your breath away if you allow yourself to think about it properly. And it has nothing to do with alien architecture. The moon is a time machine. On Earth, the past is constantly being erased. Wind strips rock, rain dissolves minerals, rivers carry sediment to the sea, ice sheets scour continents clean, forests grow over ruins, bacteria break down organic material, plate tectonics subducts ancient seafloor into the mantle. The oldest exposed surface rocks on Earth are roughly 4 billion years old, and finding them requires geological detective work. Most of Earth's history has been destroyed. The moon has none of these erasure mechanisms. There is no wind, there is no rain, there is no plate tectonics, no volcanic renewal of the surface, no biology to break things down. The only force continuously reshaping the lunar surface is the slow rain of micrometeorites, interplanetary debris, mostly smaller than a grain of sand, that gradually turns and mixes the uppermost layer of regolith at a rate of perhaps a centimeter per million years. Below that thin disturbed zone, the record is pristine. Every crater on the moon is a record of a specific impact event. Many can be radiometrically dated. The distribution of crater sizes and ages tells us about the history of the solar system's debris environment. The frequency of large impacts in the early solar system the timing of the so-called late heavy bombardment, approximately 3.9 billion years ago, the gradual clearing of interplanetary space as the planets swept their orbital neighborhoods clean. The Moon is an archive of the solar system's violent youth, preserved with a fidelity that no terrestrial record can approach. The Apollo astronauts left their boot prints on the surface between 1969 and 1972. In 2011, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photographed those landing sites from orbit. The trails of footprints are clearly visible. The descent stages of the lunar modules are clearly visible. The discarded equipment, the retroreflectors, the scientific instruments, all still there. In some images, you can even see the American flag still standing, though they have been bleached white by decades of unfiltered ultraviolet radiation. If boot prints survive 50 years, impact craters survive billions. This is the real wonder of the Moon. Not that someone built cities on it, no one did, but that it has remembered, with extraordinary precision, the first 4 billion years of the solar system's existence. And it is waiting for us to come back and read what it has written. We have barely started. What Apollo astronauts actually saw. 12 human beings have walked on the surface of the Moon. 12 people have experienced what no photograph, no simulation, no description can fully convey. Standing on another world, looking up at a black sky from which the stars do not twinkle. Looking across a landscape of gray rock and gray dust that extends to a horizon closer than any horizon on Earth. Because the Moon is smaller, looking back at a blue marble hanging in absolute blackness, a planet that contains every ocean and every mountain and every living thing you have ever known. They all reported the silence. Not quietness, silence. Absolute, total vacuum silence. On Earth, even in the most remote wilderness, there is always some sound. Wind, insects, birds, the creak of cooling rock, the sound of your own breathing amplified by air. In a spacesuit on the Moon, you hear the hiss of your own air supply, the crackle of the radio, the sound of your heartbeat transmitted through bone. But outside the suit, there is nothing. Sound cannot exist in vacuum. The silence pressed against the Apollo astronauts like a physical thing. None of them reported towers. None reported glass domes. None reported the ruins of ancient cities. Neil Armstrong described the surface as magnificent desolation. Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the Moon during Apollo 14 and later became fascinated by parapsychology, described a profound spiritual experience. But it was the experience of cosmic scale, of smallness, of being a brief and fragile organism in an incomprehensibly vast and indifferent universe. Not the experience of walking through alien ruins. If there were structures on the Moon, the 12 people who actually stood on it would have seen them. The architecture of cognitive bias. Let us assemble the full picture of why the lunar structure's belief persists, not to mock the people who hold it, but to understand the machinery of the delusion. Confirmation bias. We notice the evidence that supports our belief and dismiss or explain away the evidence that challenges it. Hoagland's response to high-resolution photographs showing no structures. NASA removed the structures from the new images, is a textbook example. Every piece of disconfirming evidence is absorbed and re-emitted as confirming evidence. Pattern recognition overflow. The human visual system is so optimized for detecting meaningful structure, particularly the geometric regularities associated with manufactured objects, that it regularly produces false positives. Straight lines, right angles, symmetry, regularity, all of these trigger the "this was made by an intelligent agent" response. But the universe produces these things through purely physical processes. Crystal lattices are geometrically regular. Lava flows produce columnar jointing that looks architectural. Frost heaving creates polygonal patterns in soil. The geometry of natural objects routinely exceeds what we intuitively expect from randomness. Social reinforcement. Belief communities form around these ideas, and within those communities, dissent is penalized and confirmation is rewarded. The person who posts a blurry photograph with a circle drawn around an anomaly receives social validation. The person who explains why it's a camera artifact receives hostility. The social dynamics drive belief toward extremism, not accuracy. And then there is what we might call the glamour of the alternative narrative. The official story, rocks, craters, geological silence, vacuum, is not glamorous. It does not make the moon feel significant, meaningful, charged with human resonance. The conspiracy narrative makes the moon the most important object in the sky, a repository of alien history, a suppressed truth that only the spiritually and intellectually bold are willing to acknowledge. It flatters the believer. It makes them part of an elite that sees what the sheep cannot see. This is a very old human dynamic. It predates the internet, the space age, and photography. It is the same dynamic that has always produced secret knowledge traditions. The Gnostics, the alchemists, the Hermeticists. Traditions that promised a privileged access to hidden reality. The lunar structures community is, in a sense, a technologically updated version of an ancient human tendency. Returning to the beginning. 6 shadows on a photograph from November 1966. William Blair with his compass and protractor, measuring triangles on the gray plain of the Sea of Tranquility. What do we see, if we are honest? Several lunar boulders projecting long shadows across flat terrain because the sun was barely above the horizon. The same thing you would see if you photographed a gravel parking lot at sunset. Rocks become monuments, shadows become proofs. The geometry of coincidence becomes evidence of design. We want to see more, and so we see more. Because our brains are built for exactly this, for extracting meaning from ambiguous data, for finding the signal in the noise, for detecting the presence of other minds in a universe that is mostly mindless. This is a magnificent capacity. It is the capacity that built science, built art, built civilization. It is the capacity that put 12 human beings on the moon in the first place. But it has a failure mode. Sometimes we find meaning that is not there. Sometimes boulders become obelisks, film scratches become towers, and JPEG artifacts become the ruins of a civilization that never existed. The moon is empty, but it is empty in the way that a vast and ancient library is empty when there are no readers, full of information, patient, waiting. Beautifully, powerfully, devastatingly empty, the way a desert is empty at dawn. The way the ocean is empty in calm weather, the way the night sky is empty when the clouds clear, and you remember, suddenly, that you are looking at billions of years of light. The 12 people who walked on it saw rocks, dust, craters, and a silence so complete that it impressed them more than any structure could. They saw the earth, small, blue, suspended in absolute darkness, and understood, in a way that no photograph and no description can transmit, what it means to be a small, brief, fragile, fortunate thing alive on that small, blue, improbable world. That is the real story of the moon, not the invented towers, not the manufactured mysteries. The real story, that we went there, that we stood on another world, that we looked back, and that the moon, ancient and silent and indifferent and magnificent, was exactly what it had always been: rock, dust, craters, and a silence that the universe has maintained for 4.5 billion years, interrupted, briefly and improbably, by 12 pairs of human footprints. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are curious about what the universe actually looks like when you remove the fiction. And if you want more stories about the things we see that aren't really there, the patterns we find in noise, and the real mysteries hiding behind the invented ones, subscribe. There is a lot more to come.